How do you make the much needed changes in your life that you need, that you know you need to make? How do you make the changes in our communities and in the world that we need to make? The new year is always about resolutions, things that we want to change. Personally, in your neighborhood, in your community, in your world. Well, again, as we see in Scripture over and over again, change is very difficult, and change usually does not happen until adversity comes. I would prefer to change the things in my life if it were easy. More people would change if it was easy, but most change is hard. It's daring. Now remember, we are talking about the process of change and the 6 C's of change. And the first C of change always begins with a crisis. Crisis is the first word. We all have them. An addiction is threatening to break up or destroy an important relationship. Your anger is threatening your marriage. Your lack of employment is threatening bankruptcy. Your out of control spending is threatening stability. Crisis. We all have them. A crisis at work, and you're the leader where you can either address it or ignore it. A crisis at home where your kids, they need something to change. A crisis with your health, and you need to make some personal habit change. Personal crisis, there's the global crisis, there's the crisis of injustice all around us today. There are more refugees, misplaced people in our world because of famine and war than ever before. Over 90% of girls who are sex trafficked come from the foster system. There is over 1 billion people still that lack access to clean water. The people most affected by this virus, this pandemic, are the poor, the elderly, the sick, and those who lack health care. Food insecurity in America has quadrupled since the pandemic, and 1 in 7 children in America go to bed hungry every night. I don't say that to make us just feel bad or to shame, but it's to show that there are crises all around us. Out of this crisis with these boys comes a conviction. A conviction. Nothing significant, nothing great, nothing righteous, nothing important is ever done without a deep-rooted, selfless, courageous conviction. With the crisis all around, God is asking, do we have a deep conviction to change it? This is what I pray your daily prayer will be, and mine too, and that is, God, break my heart for the things that breaks your heart. It's easy to see crisis all around us. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to see it, but to do something about it must come from a deep conviction. But a deep conviction in and of itself will not bring change. That conviction must lead us to the 3rd C, which is a commitment to make a change. Over the last 4 years, I've been working with nonprofit organizations and with churches and with pastors, and I begin to see there's a crisis in the Western church. George Barna did a study that over 50% of senior leaders have never spoken to their congregations about the poor. Consumerism is at an all-time high. The Western church attendance is declining based on 3 reasons people give. The church is irrelevant, it's greedy, and it's judgmental. And I've met so many people over the last 4 years who are Christ followers, who care about the poor, but they've given up on the local church. The crisis that in California, only 7% of people say they belong to a local church. And so the conviction was that God broke my heart. It was God convicting me of what the church could be and to get back into the game. Yet we know, and many of us have experienced, that the church is the hope of the world when it's working right, when we're loving one another, and when we're loving our neighbor. But that conviction was in me, but it had to turn into a commitment to jump back into the game. And with a few people and my brother, we gathered together about 8 months ago, and we said, we got to do something focused on the ancient teachings of the prophet Isaiah, who said to loose the chains of injustice, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to set the oppressed free. When conviction turns into a commitment, it will lead us to the 4th C word, which is it'll cost you something. It'll cost you something. Ken Blanchard said this: there is a difference between interest and commitment. When you're interested in something, you do it only when it's convenient. When you're committed to something, you accept no excuses, only results. You see, there is a cost to ending poverty. It'll cost you some cash. There's a cost to standing in the gap of injustice. It'll cost you some courage and some inconvenience. There's a cost to working on your marriage. It'll cost you some time and humility. There's a cost to overcoming anger. It will cost you your pride. There's a cost to overcoming an addiction. It will cost you some short-term pleasure and some accountability. There is a cost to sponsoring a child. It'll cost you a few cups of coffee and an upgrade on your iPhone. There's a cost to surrendering your life to God. It'll cost you your own will. There is always a cost to making significant change, and that cost leads to the fifth C, which is there will be consequences. There will. You might lose some friends. You might miss out on some temporary pleasures. You might be unpopular. Moving from self to selflessness is a consequence. Simplifying your life, risk looking a fool, risking failure, not playing it safe. But it's only when we're willing to go through the process, to be honest about a crisis, be convicted to do something, commit, count the cost, and face the consequences. This is where change, real change, can happen. And I hope this helps you for this year as we go into this new year of new beginnings, the process of change. Life is always a struggle. There will be a crisis this year. They will come in large ways and small ways. Focus on the process, because God is doing a new thing in the wilderness and in the wasteland.